Okay, so this last fallacy in the category of fallacies of relevance is called ad hominem. Uh, there are many types of ad hominem. We're going to talk about a couple of them. But I think this one you're pretty familiar with. Maybe you've even heard this term. So let's see an example of this.
I feel that I am a conservative. Now, I also feel I'm a common sense conservative because some of the views I don't agree with. And I think a lot of people agree with me, obviously, based on what's happening.
Flexibility is a good thing, but you shouldn't be flexible on core principles. I like Donald. He is an amazing entertainer. But his policies for most of his life.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
For most of his life, his policies have been very, very liberal. For most of his life, he has described himself as very pro-choice and as a supporter of partial birth abortion. Right now, today, as a candidate, he supports federal taxpayer funding for Planned Parenthood. I disagree with him on that. That's a matter of principle, and I'll tell you.
You are the biggest liar. You probably are worse than Jeb Bush. You are the single biggest liar.
All right.
This guy lied. Let me just tell you, this guy lied about Ben Carson when he took votes away from Ben Carson in Iowa, and he just continues. And today we had robocalls saying Donald Trump is not going to run in South Carolina, where I'm leading by a lot. I'm not going to run. Vote for Ted Cruz. This is the same thing he did to Ben Carson. This guy will say anything. Nasty guy. Now I know why he doesn't have one endorsement from any of his colleagues.
All right, John, I get to respond.
Pick from the buffet there.
He's a nasty guy.
Well, I will say it is fairly remarkable to see Donald defending Ben after he called him pathological and compared him to a child molester, both of which were offensive and wrong. But let me say more broadly, you notice Donald didn't disagree with the substance, that he supports taxpayer funding for Planned Parenthood. And Donald has this weird pattern. When you point to his own record, he screams, liar, liar, liar. If you want to go...
Where did I support it? Where did I support it? Hey, Ted, where did I support it?
If you want to go and watch the video, go to our website, tedcruz.org.
Where did I support it, Ted?
Out of Donald's own mouth.
Where did I support it?
You supported it when we were battling over defunding Planned Parenthood. You went on television and said Planned Parenthood does wonderful things and we should not defund
it. Does do wonderful things, but not as it relates to abortion.
So tell me, what are the wonderful things? What are the wonderful things it does?
There are wonderful things having to do with women's health.
You see, you and I disagree on that.
Not when it comes to abortion.
The reason principle matters, sadly, was illustrated by the first questions today. The next president is going to appoint 4 Supreme Court justices. If Donald Trump is president, he will appoint liberals. If Donald Trump is president, your Second Amendment will go away.
Okay, kind of painful to watch. Brings back sore memories, but example of ad hominem, which is that instead of presenting an argument that has genuine reasons why the other person's argument is wrong, the ad hominem arguer verbally attacks the other person. You'll see this in a lot of political debates. This was just a really strong and clear example of that. But it happens in every political party and between everybody. There are many different kinds of ad hominem. We'll examine 2 of them, the ad hominem abusive and the ad hominem circumstantial. By the way, ad hominem means to the person. So ad is to or towards, and hominem is person. So essentially you're attacking the person rather than describing through reasons why their argument is wrong or what they're saying is wrong. So, for example, there's a rock star named Bono who has campaigned against world debt for the world's poorest countries and called for a cancellation of third world debt. And a critic of his said, why should the world's leaders listen to Bono talk about the world debt when he's nothing but a neoliberal puppet and an ambassador for imperial exploitation? So one of the marks of ad hominem is also specifically exaggeration and sort of getting carried away in terms of description and misrepresenting people. But notice here that if Bono has been campaigning for the cancellation of debt, and this person didn't talk about the economic or political reasons why that shouldn't happen, he's just attacking Bono himself and saying that he's a puppet and an ambassador for exploitation. So ad hominem When the arguer responds to the other person's argument by verbally abusing or attacking that person, either crudely or subtly, that's called ad hominem abusive. And this verbal attack is put forth as evidence as to why the other person's argument is refuted, but no genuine evidence is ever provided. Okay, so again, the hallmark of any fallacy is that there's no evidence that leads to the conclusion. They substitute it with something else. And in this case, they're substituting it with insults towards the speaker or the person providing some sort of argument. Here's another example, ad hominem circumstantial. So maybe one voter will say to another voter about me, don't listen to Bhavna Kamil. Of course, she made that argument for increasing state revenue for education. She's a professor at the community college and she wants a salary increase. So again, this person is not offering evidence for what is wrong with my argument, but instead attacks my personal circumstances and thus my motive. Even if I wanted a salary increase, it does not mean that I haven't offered a good argument for the increase in state revenue or for education. So essentially, ad hominem circumstantial questions somebody's motives and says you shouldn't listen to them because they have this other motive. That could be true, and we'll talk about it in the next slide, but it still doesn't really address the argument that the person is making, which is what you need to do when you are putting forth some sort of argument or rebuttal. So if somebody makes an argument, if I say we should increase state funding for education, someone needs to reply with, we don't have enough money, or that's not a priority, or priority should be given to these other things. They need to actually respond to the reasons that I'm giving. But just to say, like, I'm not going to listen to you because you're a professor, doesn't really respond to the argument. But does that mean it's never, like, is it ever appropriate to consider someone's circumstances? Yes, it could be. You might recognize this image. I think it's from Chick-fil-A. So Chick-fil-A, obviously serves chicken. So you have these cows saying, eat more chicken. And so you might look at this. I know this is just humorous, but it's actually a good example. It's a little bit, it is humorous because they're cows, right? So they want people to not eat burgers. They want them to eat chicken. So you might think, well, they're just saying to eat more chicken because they don't want to get killed. That's true, but maybe these cows have good reason, right? Eating chicken is a little bit friendlier on the environment than eating beef. Maybe there could be other health reasons to eat chicken rather than beef. So maybe these cows have a lot of good reasons. Now, the fact that they are sort of self-interested and maybe selfish in their motivation doesn't necessarily mean that they may not have good reasons for why you should eat chicken. But it can be appropriate to consider someone's circumstances. So let's think about that for a second. If someone does have a vested interest in the issue, then it's good to look closely at the argument and including the evidence that's being provided and not to just accept it. So if you do say, well, Professor Kamil is saying this because she just wants a raise, well, then it might raise like a red flag, and it might be a good idea to examine the argument more carefully. But just that circumstance itself doesn't mean the argument is wrong. It just means that you have to be a little more careful and scrutinize a little bit more to make sure that I am giving putting forth good reasons and not just doing it for selfish motivations. So you don't assume that just because the person has a vested interest that the argument isn't a good one. Okay, so again, when you're looking at someone's argument, look at the argument itself. You don't necessarily accept or refute it just because of who the person is or the circumstance they're in. If you think they have a selfish motivation, that just means you need to maybe scrutinize the argument a little more, look at it a little more carefully, but it does not mean that you automatically dismiss their argument. And sometimes a person's character does matter. So you might need to take that into account if it's a special circumstance, like you're seeing, if they're giving witness or giving a testimonial, then you need to see like, oh, okay, what are the motivations here? And is this person trustworthy? But if they're just putting forth an argument about some other issue, you really need to look at the argument and not just the person and their circumstance. So again, when you're looking at an argument, is it focused only on attacking a person's character or circumstances and not providing genuine evidence? Is there name calling or verbal abuse? Are they just attacking a motive? or does the evidence actually support the conclusion? So if they're doing these first three things and not providing evidence, then we have a fallacy. If, however, they are not doing these things and they do provide evidence for the conclusion, then you have a legitimate argument. Okay, so we've gone through 3 different fallacies. We went through appeal to force, appeal to pity, and the ad hominem. What you will do next is take a short quiz. It's 5 questions long, and there will be different scenarios or statements or arguments, and I want you to identify whether there's a fallacy involved or not, and if there is a fallacy, to name which one. After you complete that assignment, then we will move on to covering some more fallacies. All right. Thanks and good luck. And again, contact me or if you have any questions or concerns.